Hello and welcome to the AI Digest. My name is Joaquin, and with me today is Jessica Talisman. Jessica Talisman is an information architect currently working in Amazon. Jessica, it's a pleasure to have you here today. And right now, you're calling in from Santa Cruz.
Santa Cruz, California.
And tell me a little bit more about what information architecture is.
Information architecture, I think, is pretty loaded as a term. It really has to do with the infrastructure. So anything that makes information go, controlled vocabularies, taxonomies, schemas, ontologies are all part of that stack. Glossaries, data catalogs. And essentially, it's organizing a holistic system by which information travels through and is managed and governed.
And you've have a long and impactful career doing this, managing information, giving it shape, architecting it into a useful format for an entire organization, not to just use it in the front end, but for a holistic use of the back and front and all aspects of an organization in academia, museums, e-commerce, educational technology, advertising technology, and government. Can you tell me about where this all started? Where did your passion for organizing information came from?
Sure. So it really started when I was pretty young. I had the benefit of growing up in a household where my dad was very involved with galleries, libraries, arts, and museums, almost as a side project. But I became really intrigued by information and organization of information to the point where when I was in third grade, I built a library for myself, out of my books, my brother's books, then went to my best friend's house, had a whole card catalog system with cards I made in the back and the card catalogs where people could actually check out books. So that's really where it started. And then it wasn't until college and then graduate school that sparked my interest in terms of finding reliable information. And that led into my first real job out of college, which was for the Shoah Foundation for Visual History, which was like a huge video catalog of interviews, segments from interviews from World War II. And that was pretty life changing. It was really, really groundbreaking technology in the late 90s, and relied basically on patented systems in order to ghost mark and tag bits of content, so 3 to 6 minute segments. And the end product was, and is, because it still exists, is that people can search for any of the 3 to 6 minute segments doing research as students, even just as a person coming off the street, and find that information. And that was a pretty intense information architecture project in and of itself. So
Your expertise lies in information architecture, taxonomy, ontology, knowledge graphs, any way that you can grab knowledge and make it usable for anybody else. You mentioned earlier, and before we started the recording, that you got your master's and you have a deep passion for pedagogy, the
mhm.
the theory of how to teach people, how do you break down knowledge to make it ingestible. Can you tell me what relationship exists there? I mean, organizing information is one thing, making it easy to ingest is another, but how does that bleed into you wanting to be an information architect?
Um, I think humans just innately and by nature have a thirst or want to find information. Part of it is out of curiosity. Humans are curious beings, but our very brains, the way that we process information in our world is relational, and it is grounded in that file and or folder and file system that we all have in our heads. We organically process and crave information um, in a way that drives both confirmation bias. So we might be looking for certain answers that confirm assumptions we might have. And on the other end, it may be truly just for the pure love and desire to learn more. So with pedagogy, it's the way that we learn as humans. And so some of us learn by copying others. Some of us, so it's mimicry, and that's just a very primal base area of our beings. And some of us have to learn by doing. and that's a great feature. But a lot of us need guidance in knowing how to learn by doing. Um, Part of the quality that makes us, humans, good learners, and I truly believe this, is the idea that to be a good teacher, you have to be a good student and you have to be passionate about your subject matter. So not everyone finds passion in researching or looking for information, and they'll just go with the first idea that pops up on Google or whatever a product has to offer. The promise of a product, for example, in the software world, is just that becomes religion or the word or the gospel. I think it's really important for humans in general to realize that we're always learning, that learning never stops, and that thirst for learning, like you have to feed that. And if you just become passive in your environment and you take a back seat to that process, where you don't really understand, or you become lazy or disinterested in a certain area, I think it's a good place to sort of check why. um, because in order for us to wear any of the hats we do in our lives or to engage in our world, I do truly believe, that it's important to be involved, curious, and informed. So those information seeking behaviors, I've been in organizations where I'm told taxonomy is just an invented thing. It doesn't really exist. We don't need taxonomies. We don't need controlled vocabularies. We don't need glossaries. We don't need data catalogs. That's too much work. Um, and, the base problem with those types of assumptions is, first of all, then we're breaking apart from the model of our brain, of how we think, of how machines think. You can't turn on your computer without that taxonomy type system, order of operations, folder and file system that helps to, make your computer light up and know what to open first and know where you left off and all of those crazy things that happen automatically. I think one of the great benefits is not taking for granted what's automated, but to understand how things really work. And that's part of what that curiosity lends itself to.
Um, hmm. I have to sit on that for a little bit. That's quite rich. Yeah, I'm in full agreement with you. One of the things that it immediately stuck out to me as you were um, giving me that payload of information was that the a person's made up of belief systems, thoughts, and behaviors. And to be a good teacher, you need to be able to circumvent some of those confirmation biases and open the doors for a new perspective. So, in light of that, I would really appreciate it if we could lay the context for the audience to understand some of the terminology that you use in your day to day and the nuances between it, because I think that's going to help us shape the rest of this conversation in a constructive manner. Um, First of all, information architecture. What is information?
Information is, when you take data or a datum. So it's the assemblance of concepts that, manifest or unfold to equal something that is understood by humans or understood by machines. So information, can manifest itself if you take a single concept. That concept doesn't mean anything. It could mean like cup, you know? That cup makes sense in terms of like what you use it for, as an example. The context, that is given to a certain word, term, or even data, even an identifier. That identifier doesn't make sense unless there is that semblance of data to create a little nugget of information. And it may be in a semblance of more than one thing that then creates information.
That is the precursor then. That the singular atomic piece is the
Yes.
precursor. Tuesday is a word, but unless it's relative to something, some sort of timeliness,
Yeah.
then it becomes valuable information.
Yes. And it is that convergence of concepts. If you have the word window and you want me, sure, it's a window, but it could be a window to the world. It could be a window on my house. It could be many things in that context. But understanding the action, the where, what, when, why, how, helps to ground that truth as a piece of information.
Our reality is shaped around events, is it not? I mean,
Yep.
you gave an abstraction of a window. A window doesn't mean anything unless it's relative to an action or a thing, or it's happening to be part of some other structure. Um, so I think in these definitions that are pure, we may confuse information for data in the world of computation. Is that not
Yes.
what's going on?
Yes. And like in context, you can think of something like you mentioned before, timeliness. And if we define timeliness, does it mean timeliness like time? Or like that one little piece of if you have datum, like that little molecule or atom, um, that there's an element of consistency in the existence of that thing. And it seems very abstract to say that, but the way that we solidify that molecule or the meaning of that atom, it's much easier to look at it from the perspective of, say, a chemical, like a periodic table. You're defining just by way of that periodic table and that element being that element, like it could be fluoride, say, or it could be calcium, just anything on that, an iron. There are characteristics that define that thing. So it's much easier for that then to become a piece of information. When we look at it in terms of computation, it's assumed that everyone knows what we mean, but without the context. It's assumed that we know if you were just to release the label or, an identifier for the label fluoride without all of its characteristics, its chemical and physical characteristics, what would you how do you construct meaning out of just that one thing? You're assuming that your users and systems and computers and humans all know what just that standalone thing or piece of datum is.
That's what's that saying? When you assume you make an ass out of you and me.
Yeah, I like that.
Um, it's a powerful position, and with power comes responsibility to be constructing a system that represents knowledge, especially a multi-sided system with many different actors that have different needs and wants and intentions. Um, so how do you reason with that proposition, and how do you make it a fair system with fair data? And let's talk about fair, and then let's talk about how you reason with that kind of system.
So the base elements of FAIR, findable, accessible, interoperable, were and reusable. It A lot of people misconstrue it to think, oh, it's only means open source and things that are widely available, but it can also be localized to just your organization. And it can also be localized based on classification schemes, meaning like accessibility, not accessibility in the way of accessibility on a web service, but actual user permissions. So fair is not constrained to something that's super fairy, airy, pie in the sky, dreamy type of situation. It's actually based on efficiency.
It's real. It's like having standard nuts and bolts and Lego blocks and having them in a designated area in a particular place where you're building your things so you can retrieve it and build at an actual time. Cut down
Pragmatic.
I don't want to cut down a tree every time I need a piece of wood. I want to have it just accessible where I can go get it in Home Depot in the
Yeah.
standard that I know that it's available.
Yep. And that's part of the beauty of assembling fair systems is you are building with your customer in mind, your end user, if you consider your end users or your stakeholders, your customers, you're building, and this may sound cheesy, but with heart and for the greater good of all. And I think that's very, very important because we can tend to reserve um, either we're building or creating data or information on the fly. We don't take the time to understand our customers' pain points. And we also will tend to think it's not important. We don't understand how important each of our actions are to the greater whole, to assist from a systems perspective. And I think that's what information architecture lends itself to, is helping to bring sort of a systems thinking approach and understanding that it's not just the technical aspects, but it's really that empathy and that understanding of our customers, so that because we want to reduce duplication. It can be myriad of reasons why, but ultimately we're doing this to increase operational efficiency, to agree on a common vocabulary, to have a common understanding um, of our tenants as a whole, and to have consensus about how we're doing things. And those things are just as important. Those aspects of in an information environment are just as important as the nitty gritty, tools and our everything that we contribute to an environment in terms of our technical capabilities and knowledge.
So we have this idea that we want to construct a common understanding between people that have different realities in front of them, have different intentions, and we want them to be able to communicate, give and receive information in this one platform, in this one housing of this one library, digital library of information. Um, Earlier, before we started recording, we mentioned the requirement, the need to steep in the problem space, to explore what language is used and what that language represents in the real world. Um, what do you do with that language? How do you reason with it? How do you wrangle it? How do you give it shape so that it's nice and organized and neat?
It's interesting because I have seen lots of implementations in my years of working in different domains. And overwhelmingly, the consistent thread is that there's a certain drive for autonomy amongst teams where there's sort of a clinging to the nomenclature of whatever that team or area of an organization asserts. Like, this is the way we say it. It's not the same as this other team or this other part of the organization use whatever terms they use. And it can even extend to metadata schemas, like an Avro schema, which is ETL, methodologies and schemas will not match, even though it's the same thing. Name and title, are those the same thing? Just having some sort of consensus around it being the same thing, but allowing people to have those differences in opinions on what word they're going to use locally to store their data or to incite information. So invoke information. So something that is important is I always start with the controlled vocabulary of assessing, auditing, and negotiating between vocabularies across an organization. So that controlled vocabulary can also include, in a way, it has to include definitions. So we make sure that we have consensus and that you take away the bite in the argument. There's a little bit of a fiefdom sometimes in organizations where there's a fight or a pull of what we might use for terminology. Something that is essential in that environment also is creating that glossary so that everyone has a common reference point. So, in order to build trust with people and know that you're out for everyone's best interest, it's critical that those intersections are met with open-mindedness, but also acceptance, and that we're going to capture. Can you hear my dog?
A little bit, yeah, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Uh, um, so I hear you when you say that there needs to be a controlled vocabulary. The controlled vocabulary is meant to shape a shared representation of the word, right? I mean, the word means something, and there.
I'm gonna go and
So the shared vocabulary is meant to be the knowledge representation of a shared reality or a shared understanding of the same reality. I mean, when you said fiefdom, I was looking for like tribal, like empires, like that's the way that I look at it. But the point is the same. Of there's groups of people that they hunt and talk and do one particular set of activities. Their language evolves to represent their world, and even though they're part of a bigger kingdom or country or whatever, they're not translating those definitions amongst themselves. You could have a marketing person say leads, ops, closed ops or like missed ops. Uh, what the hell's an ops? It's an opportunity, but they use nomenclature to
Mhm.
reduce and compress and make it easy for them to consume their own information in their own immediate environment and context. And then you have other teams that have the handoff of that information, like maybe a sales team or customer fulfillment, customer service. I mean, it's just interesting that you have to deal with, not deal with, but every day of your of your working career, you are reasoning with a fragmented world, with fragmented understanding. That's really cool. I
But, the one thing is to reconcile the, differences that you capture everyone's vocabulary and you map it. You create crosswalks. So
Crosswalks, cool.
and crosswalks are critical and they're underutilized. There's two things. There's application profiles, metadata application profiles, and crosswalks that are two of the most valuable tools you can use when you're creating controlled vocabularies and you're auditing and you're helping to reconcile across an environment. Because it really does allow each fiefdom to voice their stance on specific nomenclature. Um, and define it for you. That's really magical in building that trust.
And the cool thing is that people want to express themselves and they want to gain this agreement. They want to have a handshake within their organization. They feel a distance from each other, and it's so weird because you're part of the same organization. It's
And
such an obvious
hear
problem.
you hear a lot right now about unified taxonomies or unified ontologies or unified data or data mesh, even the concept of data mesh. And part of that, I do believe, comes from eliminating the fragmentation. Obviously, you need to have that, you need to have conversation, you need to have it go both ways. And we do need to recognize how we understand and consume information at base. You have the hat you wear when you go to work, and that's how I interact in my environment. But we all have those realities of who we are outside of work and starting to observe those behaviors and understand that we're part of like this greater community that's all working towards the same goal.
So we've defined that information is something that is a composition of data. There is another term that is especially important for data engineers as much as business analysts and anybody else involved in an organization: information literacy. Can you
Mhm.
tell us a little bit more about what that means and how
Yes.
some people are information illiterate?
Information literacy is so important, even in corporate environments. So, this has been a thing since the 70s in the library and information science space. It's something that's been taught, that's been prioritized, that's part of the ALA and ACRL, which is the American College of Research Libraries. And so, it's part of most of the pedagogy that's in schools right now is to teach media and information literacy. Part of that is knowing biases, to recognize biases. We all fall victim to biases. None of us can be completely unbiased. It's really, really hard. But to know how to check your biases, to look at multiple sources for your information, citing your sources, that's something that we all learn to do in school, is very, very important. Understanding reliable sources for information is essential. And having research methodologies is something that also is critical to that environment. So oftentimes we take information and we just consider that to be the word.
Mm,
We'll see something on the news and assume it's true.
mhm,
And we're learning more and more that that's not necessarily the case. That we're even finding in real time or closely after that, like a news event that's reported was wrong or incorrect or false. And information is powerful. So, information, knowledge, you've heard before, knowledge is power. It's a pretty common phrase. And that is true because it has the ability to persuade. and it has the ability to ground people's truths. In that realm, it has the ability to also sway decision making, like critical decision making. So when push comes to shove, and for example, if you're working at a company and they're deciding to spend a bunch of money, and we present information that's not exactly accurate or true, the repercussions of false information can be pretty grave. Um, so not grounding something in truth can mean that a customer, an end user, receives the wrong information, makes the wrong assumptions, and that starts to travel and unravel. And again, people can make really decisions on false premises. And what's interesting is have been thinking about this quite a bit lately, is we would assume with technology that information is becoming easier to acquire, and information literacy is becoming easier because of technology. But in fact, it's becoming more difficult because there's more information being distributed,
Mm.
more information available, and it becomes harder for us to know what's reliable information. So the reason we all have a responsibility for doing our due diligence and understanding how to disseminate, checking several resources. I always go through this pretty extensive, like looking for those reliable resources. Is Wikipedia or Wikidata? Was Wikipedia a reliable resource? Most companies, I see a lot of them trying to leverage or use Wikipedia entries, which is great. It's a great source of information, but you're going to want to look at some other resources, even like at base, look at what sources are cited at the base of a Wikipedia article to check to make sure that even the cited sources are valid, true, live, available. And you go through the same FAIR principles, findable, right? So accessible, interoperable, reusable. So you want to see those elements when you're looking at information literacy.
So information literacy is literally just the beginning. It's just the entry point into being able to reason and manage and manipulate and consume and produce responsible information, um, and not have it affect you in a negative way or in a less damaging way if it's truly bad information. Information architecture is a big word for me, and it holds a high significance that you're responsible for sort of laying the blueprints, the diagram of how an entire building or an entire city, an entire large ecosystem works and functions with the people inside of it. So we were talking a little bit before on information architecture being kind of misused as a terminology and geared towards a more tactical sense, where it's
Yes.
meant to perform just a task, not
Yes.
not design something of grandeur, of complexity. Um, can you tell me a little bit more about information architecture from the standpoint that you're responsible for managing and directing the intent of people?
Yes. So on most of us understand information. I mean, maybe not understand information architecture, but the concept of it is all of the workings and things on the back end that make a system or an experience go.
And by backend, you mean the little file storage for datum and information and further groupings of that, right? Data at large.
And the relationships, the definitions, the metadata schemes, like what is going to transport these, pieces of data or information to make the system interoperable, to make content reusable, to help to define those things and establish them as entities within a space. And there's an order and a process to it, because when we go into, like, for instance, my role at Amazon is you are assessing and going through a pretty arduous process of figuring out what systems are in use, what's in use, what works, what doesn't work, where does data bottleneck, where is it difficult for users on the front end or consumers, meaning machine consumers. Um, and it may even be the transport of data itself, like ETL, ELT processes. Where is it not working? You're diagnosing what's not working, and you're also equally diagnosing what is working. And you're trying to surface the elements that are most important and figuring out a way to lay a strong foundation from which you can continue to build upon. So, one of the most important things to me in information architecture is whatever you're building, it needs to be extensible and it needs to be scalable. This isn't a one hit wonder. This is something that we need to be able to continue to iterate upon and grow and build into a rich ecosystem of data that can be transformed into knowledge. And ultimately, that's the goal. Now, information architecture has started to become, there's like a segment that defines information architecture strictly as the front end experience and design. So it's like navigation menus and just sort of the front end design. And so, sure, that's a type of information architecture, I suppose. But the one problem in that, what I've seen consistently in organizations, is oftentimes that's front end design work, UX, UI design work. Um, the feasibility of that design is something that information architecture holistically takes care of, because oftentimes the splashy designs of a front end may not be technically feasible to render that experience for the user on the front end.
So let's take a step back and just kind of ground this example of information architecture from the perspective of a physical library. It's only dealing with people,
Yeah.
but people are going to retrieve information. How is that constructed, and how does that function as a system?
Yes. Physical libraries are amazing. Like, anyone who's interested in studying systems, study libraries because and understand how they work. I will give listeners an idea of like the first place to look is if you look up WorldCat. So WorldCat is the world cataloging system that connects all of the information systems and libraries from around the world.
Wow.
And it's interoperable, and you can locate a book anywhere in the world, in any library or bookstore, which is pretty amazing. So
Using the ISBN?
ISBN, or you can even look by title, publisher, like there's different ways to view it, author. So it's rich metadata ecosystem in the most dreamy, iterations and unfoldings of like how things are related. I mean, it really is pretty miraculous. So if you think of libraries, they've existed since 3rd century BC, and some of the classification structures haven't really changed a lot of the logic. Really, the principal basis for a lot of libraries, physical libraries, is something called Ferber. And it took me a long time in information library science school to really wrap my brain around this concept. So Ferber, FRBR, which is also now an ontology, is functional requirements for bibliographic records. And so in that, with that lens, functional requirements of bibliographic records is like you have the manifestation of the original work. So that might be Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare, and that's like the OG of that instance. But if you think of the play and the musical and like maybe all of these iterations, there's just a sequence where you never lose that original piece of information. Everything's built upon it. So you maintain the lineage forever and ever and ever. And because of that lineage, inference is very natural, which makes it much easier to find things in a physical library because of that base cataloging system that all libraries agree upon. So that shows us, just in why physical libraries work and why you can find things and how things are cataloged and how things are organized, is that there's a consensus and understanding of context. Nothing exists without context. So things naturally are linked and related. So it's pretty spectacular when you actually look into what it's taken to construct these like systems for organizing things in physical libraries.
And when we take a look at a digital library and we expand upon that physical idea, there is now an additional layer of complexity with machine actors involved,
Yeah.
right? So how does that play out?
So, obviously physical libraries for the most part have machine actors now engaged, which is easy with content because at base most things can be found in an XML RDF format. That's sort of the base standard for most bibliographic records. But that extensibility and the interoperability with machines means that things need to be machine readable. That speaks to the XML or JSON format or serialization formats, is that if you think of the base language that most machines understand, there needs to be that explicit structure to the data.
So
Um,
human to human, we need to have a shared context, but humans to machine, there needs to be an additional layer of information that helps us transport that context between machines,
right.
right? Server to server or whatever.
Yep.
Um, so what kind of language is used between people and machines?
So mostly, obviously everyone's familiar with the search bar and just looking for something online. But in order for that to be transported or transformed, there needs to be metadata, data about data, defining things as classes, properties, relationships, attributes are all super important. So that so machines can contextualize that data. So whether it be XML, JSON, Python, like in whatever manifestation or language that's being used, there's a base serialization format that can declare and translate what these things are in any environment. If you serialize all of your content with no translation layer of what that thing is, that what that UUID is,
It's
then
noise. It's just
it's noise.
things.
It's just lots of noise and lots of things. It's more difficult for machines to render and reconcile those objects. It becomes a problem in terms of like, for example, content within the realm of my position right now with Amazon, is truly like content and document organization. There's a base layer where unless these things are clearly defined in the relationships and attributes between these things exists, they're all going to be floating individual entities with no context. And so you end up in a situation where search breaks, the interoperability between machines and people breaks because the machine is saying, I need you to write text literal exactly what this thing is, or else I'm not going to serve it to you. You can look for a keyword, and that keyword maybe has one manifestation, is not consistently used, defined, or attached to any documents. So it becomes this we start to create these alternative ways to find things to try to make sense of the mess we've created.
And all those inefficiencies or technical gaps puts a further and further psychological and negative pressure on
Yep.
the expectations of the people using that system or even working to maintain and sustain that system.
Yes.
So
And
it
it's impossible to validate. Like, then we start to become creatures of habit where we rely on just knowing what our shortcuts are to find these things, and we never are able to expand and discover the relationships between those things because they're all isolated instances that are just existing in a very two-dimensional way.
I think this leads us to a really good idea that you want to discuss, and I fully support. It's that people sort of solution before really
Yes.
define a problem. Can you expand on that and tell us a little bit more about some of the observations that you've seen out in the field on multiple occasions?
Sure. We all like cool, fancy tools and we all like to build things. I mean, I think that's why most of us are in this profession, is it's really fun to manifest and to have some like a vision come to reality. There's a lot of parroting, copycatting, of course, or ideas that we launch, because a tool promises. So we'll buy a very expensive tool and think, okay, if we just get this tool, then we can create a knowledge graph. We can automate it. We can have it create a taxonomy for us, even though our data is not defined. So there's all of these ideas where we love the sexy solutions and the sexiness, for example, of just going right to an ontology, without having your data cleaned and organized into a controlled vocabulary. And it's a pitfall for most of us. Oftentimes, what happens is you have jumped to a level of maturity where your data is not really in sync with that level of maturity. Your data does not have that level of maturity. Um, and start to apply things like ontologies, going straight for knowledge graphs without the controlled vocabulary, without a glossary, without a thesaurus, without NLP. And then we are shocked, for example, when your knowledge graph is loop-de-looping because of recursive loops, self-referential data, confusion, misinformed or mal-shaped data, so that you lack structure or it's just semi-structured, not really being able to define exactly what the problem is. It's hard to even diagnose what the problem is if you haven't even structured and created like a healthy ecosystem information architecture for your data. So, a lot of us don't like to do the less sexy work of cleaning and sorting and organizing and building these base systems, but that's where you can reap the reward of what you're building, because you not only get to become intimate with your data and understand where things are and what things are, you have the luxury of being able to shape it in a way that machines know what to do with that data. And that's pretty awesome. Then to build solutions on top of it. And oftentimes you find that you don't need such sophisticated heavyweight solutions or ontologies, for example, in the case of knowledge graphs, if your data is well shaped and organized in a way that makes machines understand what it needs to do with those things.
So there's a word, or there's a couple words we're using: taxonomy and ontology. And you mentioned you need to give shape to your data. There is some sort of hierarchy, right? There's layers to this. Can you tell us a little bit more about that in the context of taxonomy and ontology, and then we can
Yes.
take it to knowledge graphs. But first comes the fundamentals.
Yes. So taxonomy, again, like taxonomy is a hierarchy of things. We know it from zoology, from biology. Third grade, you may have been asked to create your family tree and draw it. That's a taxonomy. So the relationship, you start to understand from a very young age your context in the world. It's a really fundamental thing in general. And so taxonomies, basically think of it as that roadmap and understanding context within your organization. You create hierarchies out of controlled vocabularies. There's a rule basis to those hierarchies. So you can look at ONSI Z39. It's an ISO, really important, that drives all of the rule bases for shaping monolingual vocabularies and the thesauri. So the maturation, so from a taxonomy, you can mature that into a thesaurus, which includes alt labels, hidden labels, following the SCOS or simple knowledge ontology system, which is an upper level ontology. And by structuring your data as such, you allow for more dynamic relationships that can break out of the rules of a parent-child relationship. You start to create related to, broad relationship, narrow relationship. You include definitions, and you can even globalize. So you can include the same term in other languages that are mapped from a schema perspective. So from thesaurus, then you can layer on and create middle to lower weight, or apply middle to lower weight ontologies, which really is the logic of those relationships, and further defining what those things in your taxonomy and thesaurus are. So by way of defining for machines, if something is a property or a class or an attribute, then you're helping to shape the world for the machine. This is what this world is. This is the order of things. However, these things can have these dynamic relationships, and they can't have these certain dynamic relationships. They can behave in certain ways. These pieces of information can behave in certain ways. However, in these certain environments, you can create role bases where don't look at these things because this has nothing to do with that topic. So you start to be able to become more expressive in how you represent your information. And you also can create rule bases for example, eventing, to capture the nuances of eventing, of customer experiences, of actions within a system, of there's so many ways that you can apply ontologies to a specific corpus, and the corpus being the whole of that controlled vocabulary, thesaurus, taxonomy, thesaurus, ontology. So it's pretty exciting what you can unlock just by taking care of the housekeeping, so to speak, but also like having some pride in how you're representing the information that you have or data that you have.
And some people might come and say taxonomy is a made up word and it doesn't matter. And let's keep it flat and keep it simple. I don't care about structure.
Yeah.
But that has a negative compounding effect on the cognitive load and the processing load on the system itself and the people that use it. Can you tell me a little bit more about what happens when you don't follow best practices and you build an ontology before you build a taxonomy, or you don't build a controlled vocabulary and get everybody's consensus before building the system as a whole?
Um, I think one of the biggest risks in doing that is that you're introducing too many opportunities for waywardness. So ontologies help you to wayfind through organized and structured data and some knowns, those taxonomies, that folder and file system, orders of operation. So if you don't have that foundation, then you're introducing the opportunity for hallucinations within a system that doesn't even have AI, for example, or what might be perceived as untruths. So you're introducing the opportunity for misinformation within a system, for inability to find information, and for mixed nomenclature, where you start to have systems that develop its own logic separate from how the organization defines that logic. Um, it's difficult for us to communicate as a whole or a community of people if we all have different definitions of the same thing. If you jump to ontologies, then you're making assumptions, and that's, to be completely honest, I feel like that's a level of disrespect in a way, because if we understand and consider information as a great, and ultimately knowledge is power, and you have respect for that, you also have that mutual respect. You're developing that trust and mutual respect with your community of users, and that's very, very important.
And it sort of falls that it's good intentions that they just want to get started, get stuff done, and they want to yield some sort of impactful solution, but they don't understand that a localized effort is expending the same resources that could be used at a system-wide effort
Yeah,
in a small case, and they're introducing something that's fragile
yeah,
and requires additional amendments and additional reconciliation of other parts of that system. It's just it, they could be tackling it from the big picture down
yeah,
and gaining consensus. It's just lack of understanding that that's the way to approach things.
exactly. And I think also, and we all have to be honest, it's a lot of work, and there are manual efforts involved, undoubtedly, because it's wrangling herding cats. It's there's a bit of that, but also methodologies for being able, in automating or semi-automating methodologies for clustering, for example, so you know what you're dealing with, and then sorting, and there's various machine learning algorithms that you can employ, but you are always part of the process
You have to
because,
touch it.
yeah.
You have to touch it. You have to be in the loop.
Yes, and it's fun. I mean, it gets to be a certain cadence of fun. That's coming from me, but it is interesting because you really get to know the fingerprint of an organization, and really, and I've felt this way several times in different organizations, is it feels like you are creating, that digital fingerprint of the organization, the more honest profile of who the people are, what everyone's about, what we're building, how we're building it, what we believe in, like all of those things we learn when we're on board an organization, whether it be academic or museum or whatever, is you have the ability to project that and create that consistent fingerprint that no matter where you go, that brand, that digital brand's always there.
What are some of the negative preconceived notions that people come into when they look at quality standards? I mean, I want to go all the way back to where we started because I think it's important to discuss, you know, at an organization level, people make mistakes.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, when you go back to the roots of the situation, what do people believe is quality data, and how
Yes.
do you ensure that it is actually fair quality data?
So oftentimes, like, and a common example is that data cleaning efforts will happen. You get this flat list that's supposedly clean, but and literal duplicates sure um, are resolved. However, the actual cleaning involves reconciling hypernyms and hyponyms and synonyms and being able to map those efforts. So the standards for what that clean data is, deduplication doesn't mean just removing explicit duplicates. Deduplication means also reconciling, and again, those crosswalks to reconcile differences in nomenclature. All of those elements, like for example, timeliness. Timeliness does not mean like, what time did it get here? Timelessness means that when someone requests data, that it arrives in a timely manner, however that's defined within your organization. Or if you have a subscription, for example, to a service, that those should be timely, the delivering of that information. Accuracy, again, speaks to that information quality. So when you queried something, or when you searched for something, or you asked for something, did you receive what you asked for? Is it accurate in its portrayal, or is it outdated, and is it a conglomeration of a bunch of other stuff that you didn't need, or wasn't relevant, or was outdated? So there's like these elements of data quality that are essential and fundamental. And depending on the framework you're looking at, these frameworks go back to the 80s, 70s, 80s. You're looking at different ways to measure. There's data quality frameworks, there's information quality frameworks. They might have different specs. The net wholesome is that it really is unique to your organization, but you're looking for, deduplication, machine readability, interoperability, reusability, like all of those same principles from FAIR apply to data quality frameworks. At least the FAIR principles must be there. Um, in terms of applying a data quality framework locally within your organization, it's thoughtfulness and diagnosing from the root cause problem and finding the antidote to that root cause problem. What behavior and what habits exist within this organization that are leading to this problem with differences in nomenclature or inability to have consensus around how we do something? For example, that base quality is part of what it helps you establish, or helps, for example, an information architecture program establish data quality metrics. And every governance that I've created to some extent has included at least FAIR principles, and it establishes some data quality framework for the organization and the environment.
So this is sort of getting us to the whole the original topic of the conversation. I kind of wanted to sneak it through this architecture of fundamental knowledge, painting this castle of how things are layered together in a pretty ornate way. Um, there cannot be, people are afraid that AI is going to take over our jobs, take over the world, it's going to gain sentience, but even the systems that we create don't fully represent how we can reconcile knowledge with people.
Yeah.
There can't be, in your words, in the topic of the discussion, there cannot be any AI without IA.
No. No. And so if we rely, like, one of the issues is if we don't have like a base truth, and that we haven't taken the time to really reflect as teams, as organizations, whoever's implementing AI, whether it be a chatbot or some sort of other system, is that you have to ground the truth. That means taking the time to really define and classify, because if you think of a decision tree, something really basic from machine learning that's included in part of the statistical model that is, like, for example, ChatGPT, or any sort of AI, is it needs to know, AI needs to know what it's posting to. It needs to understand if this concept comes up, then this maps to this object within this local environment, how it's defined. If you don't give a base taxonomy or some sort of classification structure, if you expect AI to create that for you, there's no way to know because people define that process. People define the quality and people define what that information, what the meaning behind that information is. Information, again, is only meaning if there's context and relationships and descriptors. Like you need that whole picture, that richness from humans to ground a truth. And so, unless we ground our truth and create that essential structure that becomes what is the what isness of a situation or of a people of a place, then it's impossible to for a machine learning algorithm or for AI, the assemblance of algorithms, to infer or of course it's going to guess. But do you want to relinquish your power to some global model that is a cookie cutter, standardized, hit everything with one shot, maybe 2 years out of date type model? Or do you want to curate the experience and curate the output of that model? You have to tell it what is and what these things mean and how we define them.
Well, the logo's right over here.
Yeah,
Swarm, the acronym stands for Sentient Wisdom and Artificial Reasoning Machines.
yeah, yeah,
Um, it comes from sentient wisdom, the wisdom of people, that we can fashion artificial reasoning machines. We can't expect machines that are born from the minds of people to reason on our behalf.
yeah.
It's
No,
not possible yet.
it's impossible. Yeah, because that infers, that tells, that in and of itself is sentience is that there is emotion, feeling, that there is that sense of intuitive knowledge. There's an intuitiveness. There's something that's
Autonomy.
mhm. And sure, maybe one day that's going to happen, but right now, being trained on Wikipedia pages as an example. There's a classic machine learning exercise when I was learning. It was basically an algorithm to predict WWF fighters. Wait, no. Yes, it was a while ago, but you can grab these packages off of GitHub. And essentially, what you're doing is you're doing fight predictions, but it relies on Wikipedia pages because all the information about fighters is held. You can go to any of the Wikipedia page, and information will be retired and updated. And it's a good exercise to kind of understand how these models work. Um, so if you're crawling the depth of pages to make predictions, for example, in Wikipedia of what someone might be looking for, information that might, serve an end user's questions, you'll notice that it's conversational, it's a chatbot, but essentially with each pass, you're giving more context, more context, more context, more context. So part of developing that intelligence and understanding is to be able that a person shouldn't have to do that.
A chatbot's nothing but a shadow of a person.
Shadow. Yeah.
What are some parting words? What are some advice you can give to data engineers or people that deal with data from the business side or the technical side? What do you want to leave as an impression on people that are trying to make sense of this world? They've been in this world. They know it's filled
Yeah.
with pain, but they don't know a better way out or forward.
I think, there's something about working fast in the system. That's exciting. And we all go to work or we do our jobs in order to get things done and to have those great wins and that camaraderie. There's an element of being around people that's really great. But ultimately, it's some of the more arduous work or manual work or the things in which we're having to spend hours, bleary eyed in front of a computer. And it seems very, very difficult when you're in it or you're there. But taking the time to kind of open up your world and understanding and being willing to do those tasks that you may not like to do, to get to know all aspects of the data that you're dealing with. So understanding not just, okay, how am I going to get it from point A to point B, but understanding the deeper aspect of it is like, well, what am I actually dealing with? What am I actually transporting? What am I actually working on manipulating in this specific instance? Starting to understand the context, I think, helps make you a better engineer, because you learn different ways of doing things. You also learn the importance of structuring data in such a way, and that you are lending, you're actually with purpose building a system that is intended to help customers and help end users and help consumers.
Lastly, I'm gonna ask this as a jumping off from that perspective, what do you say to the attitude, "It's not my job to know"?
I'm somewhat careful there in that if you believe it's not your job not to know, then that's your belief, and I'm not going to change your belief. But at the same time, like, I think that intention is everything. And in order to really understand and be vested in what you do day to day, we spend most of our time at work. It's really important to care. If you don't care about what you're working with the material, it's kind of like an artist being like, I don't really care about the paint, or I don't really care about, the materials that I'm working with, if I'm an artist, or if I'm a car, I don't really care about the fuel. You ask
Or
anyone who's into cars, they're going to be like, it matters.
or if you're a doctor or a surgeon, you could cause harm.
Yep. It's do no harm. So it's really, I think ethically, it's important, but then also it's passion. It's, do you lead with passion and do you lead with intent, or do you lead with it's just my job and I'm clocking in, clocking out, and I'm just pushing buttons? So are you a cog in the wheel, or are you part of the process? That's how I
Well,
think of it.
I like that. Um, Thank you very much for the time spent and dropping some serious knowledge in us. Um,
Thanks, Joaquin. It's fun. I appreciate it.